Okay, I gotta talk about this Peter Zeihan fellow, or Zeihan, or whatever his name fellow, that just, this guy just popped up out of nowhere, started appearing on my Google feed, and I'm presuming a lot of other people's Google feed. No one knows much about his background, as far as I can tell. So pretty much, obviously, a spook, right? That's how I feel about it. So he, I said when I first saw this guy on my feed, I watched one episode and I realized he was a spook. I could tell just by his vernacular, the way he talked, this Ivy League sort of urban elitist type of vernacular. You can tell with these people. And how does that happen? How is it that they actually develop a distinct accent? Well, because they're all hanging around each other all the time. So I knew right away, besides that, just his arguments presented as someone who was working for or on behalf, either knowingly or unknowingly, of the existent power structure in the United States. And he's crafty. And he seems to be well educated. But these people are experts at sounding, extremely well informed. They use tricks of inflection of voice, and the way they talk, the way they actually talk presents themselves as someone who's knowledgeable. So today today's video I saw, because occasionally I check in on him, because I want to see what the CIA thinks about situations, or what type of narrative they're trying to push, or maybe this guy's origin. The origin of his influence comes from some political think tank or globalist think tank. I'm not sure, but it's obviously not organic in any way, shape, or form. Like I said, he just started popping up on my feed. He was obviously promoted by YouTube, because I'm sure it's possible that a lot of people found him interesting just because they fell for his vernacular, and they got fooled into thinking that this guy is an authority on whatever subject he's talking about at any given time, just because of the way he sounds when he talks. You see a lot of this with YouTubers as well. You see Vosh comes to mind. Another one of these guys who, has this very proper vernacular, who talks slightly fast. Talking slightly fast seems to impress people as well. It's kind of, in my opinion, part of the reason for Ben Shapiro's success, Destiny's success. And Vosh was one of these people. Vosh turns out to be a complete grifter, as we've seen. So there's a certain technique that these people use. Maybe they come upon this, they come upon this technique themselves through experience and understanding that if I talk this way, people seem to be more apt to listen to me. But this Peter Zeihan fellow, he's rocketed up to 250,000 subscribers. I just saw when I was looking at his page, and he even got on Joe Rogan, which I'm starting to get really suspicious, because Joe Rogan probably has a lot of CIA people in his ear, and I'm guessing they probably got him to bring Peter Zeihan on. I haven't seen him talk about Ukraine lately, but as someone who's followed the war in Ukraine very closely, given that it's the most important, geopolitical event in our lifetime, I checked out what he was saying about Ukraine, already understanding that this guy's opinion, whether it's genuine or not, is not going to be what I wouldn't agree with it. But I like to hear other people's opinions. And the guy has literally been wrong on everything to do with Ukraine. Just like a month ago, he was saying that, the Ukrainians are about to invade Crimea and take Crimea or sever the land bridge in southern Ukraine. Absolutely ridiculous. So that would, support the idea that he's CIA, because CIA people know nothing about military matters or military history. The CIA has fought many wars, mostly clandestine wars, and has won none of them. So I don't know why anybody would trust, besides Zeihan, if he's CIA or not, or connected with the CIA through a tertiary, whether he is or not. With the CIA generally, I don't get this trust in the CIA's ability to prosecute a war. They've never won a war. Every war that they ever got involved in, their objectives were not achieved, and more often than not, the opposite occurred. We can talk about, I think Mozambique, Angola, what other country in Africa did the CIA get involved in? Congo, which they destroyed. They put Siki Mobutu in power. Nicaragua, they fought the Sandistas for many years, for decades, and the Sandistas eventually took over anyway. Just everything the CIA has gotten involved in military-wise has been an absolute disaster. That's what happens when you let Ivy League trust fund babies run a war and run military matters. Doesn't tend to work out. So today he's making the argument that the United States, I guess he's talking about the power structure that runs the United States. Okay, because to say that a country wants this or wants that is a bit of a misnomer. Every country is run by a certain group or a hodgepodge, usually a hodgepodge of different power groups. And I like to refer to that as a power structure. And in the United States, the power structure lies first and foremost with the oligarchs. They've changed over time. They've gone from being railroad barons to now they are, and then bankers, which are still a big part of the power structure. Now the tech people are becoming more influential in the power structure. But it's all about the oligarchs, generally speaking. That's your main power group. But then you have, the bureaucracy is a power group. Why are they a power group? Because if the SEC wants to, they can harass Elon Musk. It doesn't matter how much money Elon Musk has. The SEC has essentially, and all government agencies for now, essentially have unlimited money. And they can drain the coffers of any oligarch. So the bureaucracy, which since the Civil Service Act of 1881, I believe it was 1881, has become more entrenched and more powerful, and now essentially the bureaucracy is one of the estates, one of the 3 or 4 estates. Organized crime would be another part of the power structure. Organized crime basically is another form of oligarch. Okay, that's another oligarch. It's another business. It's just that their businesses tend to be illicit businesses. They have essentially merged with the intelligence agencies, and that was Whitney Webb's latest book, which I still have to buy it, but I've seen a lot of interviews with her talking about it. I need to buy that book. Actually, it's 2 books. Blackmail, it's called. It kind of focuses on Epstein, but the first book apparently goes into the history of how organized crime and the intelligence agencies started working together. And the intelligence agencies, as we know, were at least to some extent the brainchild of oligarchs like Rockefeller. The Federal Reserve is another example of private and public another example of private and public interests merging, which is by definition fascism, by the way. The Federal Reserve was a banking cartel that partnered with government to control the banking sector in the United States and to ensure that the top banks in the United States would remain the top banks. And if they ran into trouble, they could dip into the public treasury. That's what the Federal Reserve was all about. So, we have a power structure in the United States. And today, Peter Zeihan was trying to make the argument that the United States the United States, even though he implies this anyway, even though the United States is the force behind globalization, or has been the force behind globalization for the past several decades, deglobalization is happening, and he said that's true, but he said but the United States is letting deglobalization happen. It's not pushing back, etc., etc., etc. And then he goes into this, so that has problems on its face, which I can get to if I remember, but then he gets into this historical revisionism thing where he's trying to make it sound like the policies imposed on the rest of the world by the United States post-World War II were somehow were not instituted to economically enrich the power structure in the United States. He tries to use he uses nebulously, by the way, he uses the term security. The policies of the United States, the globalization policies of the United States, were all about security. Security from, I'm presuming, the Soviet Union. And he tries to make it sound like, the oligarchs in the United States were doing this for everybody else's security. That Bretton Woods, for example, was, he doesn't mention Bretton Woods, but Bretton Woods would be a major globalization policy. That's when the United States essentially made the dollar a global reserve currency. So the implication is that Bretton Woods was about security for other countries. I would imagine currency stability would be the argument. And this is so ahistorical. And it's trying to... See, this is why these CIA people are crafty. They know how to use nebulous terms and be ambiguous. They're experts at that. So he says, oh, well, it's about security. It was all about security. The United States provided trade security, economic security, I guess, to the world, and of course, actual physical military security to the world. And then he says, oh, there's a catch. There was a catch, though. The catch was the United States had to write your security policies. And see, what he's doing here, what he was doing there is he was essentially he was telling a half-truth. Yes, the United States did write everybody's security policies, but they also wrote everybody's economic policies, and they also exploited every country that they wanted to as much as they wanted to. Our power structure, that is. Our oligarchs, not the United States. Again, countries are not really, you know, that to say the United States did this is a bit, I don't think it's really a good way to describe what's going on. The people who rule the United States wrote the security policies for other countries, but they also wrote their economic policy. They also controlled their economy, essentially, because the United States had the world's reserve currency, and they could basically coerce any country, any power structure in any other country that didn't completely seal itself off from us to do whatever they wanted. We had so much money that we could topple almost any government at any time we wanted. Okay, we coerced the leaders of every country to do exactly what we wanted. We were rather, Germany, where I'm from originally, got a good deal. And the United States, rightfully so, is seen as a benevolent benefactor of the Germans, which is why now, I guess, they're falling on their own sword for the United States. Germans being Germans, it's difficult for them to adjust, let's say, and to adapt. But there were many other countries, like most of Latin America, parts of Africa, especially the Middle East, where the United States was not a benevolent force there to provide security, to help other countries with their security on the condition that all we have to do is write your security policies, right? No, the United States ran roughshod over most countries in the world. We aided the Indonesian regime in the mid-60s in committing a genocide, which is something that's been covered up pretty well because you still never hear about it, but the CIA was involved in that. So the United States wasn't this benevolent benefactor to the world. It was always about consolidating the power of the power structure of the powers that be in the United States, who by the 60s and 70s had complete control of our government and all of its resources, and thus they could do whatever they wanted anywhere in the world. So the Zeihan fellow starts with a bit of revisionism for starters, which, the way he words it, though, it would be, if you were to have a debate with him, he would try and weasel out of it saying, well, by security I meant this, or I meant that, and by this I meant that, because he's being vague and ambiguous on purpose. But he understands, he chooses his words carefully enough. Obviously, this is somewhat rehearsed, unless he's just a really good talker, which is possible. The CIA likes good talkers. That's pretty much what they do, is talk and lie, and talk some more. So he goes on that, and then let me have a sip of coffee here. And then his other argument is, well, the United States is letting globalization, the United States is not really pushing back on deglobalization. The United States isn't really is letting globalization fall by the wayside, because the United States is just a benevolent force, and the United States is just going to let other countries do what they want without pushing back. Well, I mean, the whole Ukraine war it's not about globalization or it kind of is and it kind of isn't. So most people who understand what's really going on and have been paying attention, as I have for 20, 30 years, close attention, I can remember the color revolutions. I can remember the ruble collapsing in the 90s. I can remember the exploitation by Western oligarchs of Russia. I can remember all of that. And what Ukraine is about is this power structure, which is a global power structure. The United States power structure became a global hegemonic, everybody uses this word hegemonic or hegemony now, global hegemonic power all the way through the early 2000s. And then we start seeing the rise of China, and we see Putin trying to reorder Russia in the early 2000s. But up till that point, the United States was, and after, between the fall of the Soviet Union especially, and then about 2008, I would say, the United States was the undisputed power in the world, and they could literally run roughshod over any country they wanted. They were really good they had control of the media. The power structure in the United States had control of them. Well, the media essentially was part of the power structure. That goes back to the press barons becoming prominent in the early 20th century, late 19th century. Okay, so this is, the media being part of the oligarchy or oligarchs buying media companies in order to serve their interests. That's nothing new by a long shot. I mean, people have been using the press to their advantage since the press was invented by Gutenberg. Okay, we need only take a cursory look at the history of the press to understand that it was always more about propaganda than disseminating accurate information from the start. So the press is part of this power structure. In the United States, could run roughshod over any country at any time for whatever reason. Usually it came down to resources, minerals, oil, etc. Okay? But now, the United States is losing its grip on power, just like every empire does. As I've said before, this has more to do with a broad societal malaise, a cultural sickness, if you will, than anything else. When we talk about another very similar empire, the Dutch Empire, and in their final days or final decades, there was a lot of contemporaneous accounts of decadence and decadence among the elites, especially in the Netherlands. This had to do with the fact that they had been too powerful for too long. And what happens when anyone has too much power for too long is they start to get a God complex. They lose touch with reality, and then that's when they make mistakes. The World Economic Forum, by the way, not that I'm one of these WEF conspiracy people, I kind of think the World Economic Forum are a bunch of clowns and weirdos. I'm not overly impressed by them. But I've heard reports lately that a lot of people who work with Klaus Schwab have been saying that the guy has a fucking God complex. And this kind of seems to coincide with a deterioration in the influence of the WEF. This last meeting in Davos could only be seen as an absolute PR disaster. So that would kind of coincide with that. You know, people in positions of power. This is why psychology is so important to history. Psychology informs us. I mean, it really goes hand in hand with history, especially group psychology. And so what happens to people in positions of power? First of all, their behavior becomes a lot more predictable than a normal person who doesn't have a power base to protect. Because what happens to people in positions of power is their behavior becomes more instinctual, because the need to preserve one's power and influence and wealth takes precedence over nearly all other things, and thus rationality tends to become subservient to the necessity to maintain one's position in the social hierarchy. That's an instinctual thing. And what invariably happens to, I would imagine, the vast, vast majority, with few exceptions, of people who come into positions of, high positions on a social hierarchy, is they start to develop a God complex. And this is kind of pretty much unavoidable. It's sort of a consequence of being human, and something that maybe someday neuroscientists will find a physiological reason for this, I would imagine. But it's also instinctual. You know, it's just like with the lobsters that Peterson talked about, and how, when a lobster gets on top of the social hierarchy, the brain is flooded with serotonin, which serotonin is kind of like dopamine. So those are kind of like chemicals that are reward chemicals that let the organism know that they're doing something right. And so the serotonin floods the brain, and so at that point, regardless of how rational and in control you think you are, at a certain point, your instincts and your brain chemistry start to take over the more and more powerful and wealthy you get. And then you get the God complex. Once you get the God complex, it's the beginning of the end, because that's when you start losing touch with reality. You don't understand that there's people out there that are threats to your power, and you don't understand how dangerous they are. You underestimate all of your rivals, and eventually you get supplanted. You do something stupid. You think you can get away with more than you can get away with because you have the God complex. And this is what happens to power structures that run nation states collectively, is they develop this sort of hubris, which we're seeing in the United States right now. Ukraine is a perfect example of that hubris, and this loss of touch with reality among our leaders in this country, who answer to the power structure or are part of the power structure themselves. And this hubris has led us into a disastrous proxy war that is exposing all of the weaknesses of the United States. But why did the United States get involved in this proxy war? Well, it was, contrary to what Peter Zeihan says, it was all about pushing back against deglobalization. Because Russia has always been a target of globalist elite type people. I hate to use that phrase because, a lot of conspiracy minded, a lot of people that are not rational with their conspiracy theories use that word, global elites. But there are global elites. Most of them originate in America, but there's some of them from Europe, old money from Britain to the United States. And then you have a smattering of global elites from various other countries in the world. You have a few from India, Mexico used to have a big one, telecommunications, phone guy. These global elites have always been interested in Russia because it just has so many resources. And in the 90s, they got a taste of those resources and how they can exploit them. They got a taste of it. And like a born drug addict, once they got a taste of it, they could not let go. And in comes Putin. And, obviously, if you've been watching this, if you've been watching what's going on, and you understand how the media works and how the power structure works, and if you're able to, call bullshit on propaganda when you see it, that takes a little experience. I've been watching this for 30 years, and I can tell you, it was obvious to me 20 years ago that they didn't like Putin because Putin was trying to do good for Russia and good for the Russian people, and he wasn't cooperating with these global oligarch type people. Although they liked him for a while, but from the beginning, the neocons didn't like him from the beginning. And up until about 2008, I think these global elites entertained him. But after 2008, after Georgia and the Munich conference, I think that was it. I mean, it was obvious. So this Ukraine war has always been about pushing back on deglobalization. It's always been about these global elite oligarch types wanting to get their hands back on Russia's resources and eliminating a rival, okay? And people should have known from the get-go that all of their bluster about Russia just being a gas station, I mean, maybe some people in Washington actually believe that. These aren't all necessarily the smartest people in the world, but just the level of obsession that they had should show that they saw that certain interests, many interests concurrently and tacitly seemed to agree that Putin was a major threat to their interests, okay? And so this guy Zeihan is over here saying that the United States is letting globalization, letting the world deglobalize without pushing back. Meanwhile, we're having a proxy war, and a really nasty one. I guess it seems to me, I'm guessing so far, about 200,000 people have died total. This is in less than a year. I mean, this is serious casualties. Although it seems like civilian casualties are not high enough for the media to really broadcast them. Otherwise, we'd be hearing numbers every day about civilian casualties. So they don't really have much on civilian casualties, or else they'd be nonstop talking about them. But military casualties have been extremely high, especially for the Ukrainians. The United States has essentially destroyed an entire... Already, I think. It's already a done deal. The United States has essentially destroyed an entire country in their pushback against globalization. The United States power structure, that is. Again, I don't like to say the United States as a decision maker, because the United States is just a institution with many, separate institutions making it up. And it's not a monolithic organization of interests. A lot of times these interests butt heads with each other. A lot of times they tacitly agree with each other, or they have a confluence of interests. Okay, but to say it's a monolithic, single-minded organization is definitely not realistic. So we have this. We have the rivalry with China. Again, China trying to assert itself and really being on track to being the biggest actual threat to the United States. Well, Russia is too, but China is seen as the bigger threat to the United States hegemony. Again, this increase in tensions has to do with a pushback against globalization. These people in our, whether it's the European weirdos that run Europe or our weirdos here, are going around everywhere they go and saying global rules-based order, global rules-based order, or the liberal order. They use all of these. They're going around saying that this is about keeping globalization intact, because globalization was first engineered and now it has been sustained for many decades by these oligarchs and their allies in various other institutions. So they're literally going around, from Stoltenberg to Biden, they're all going around and saying global order, global rules-based order. They're going around saying this. They're literally telling you it's about pushing back against deglobalization. Thankfully, though, I'm going to end it here because I'm getting to, not that I'm driving, but I'm getting to my customer here. I'm going to go inside to my customer. So that's Zeihan. Zeihan is so in summary, Zeihan first tries to revise history in this video, trying to make the United States government, really, I think he's really more about protecting the government's interests, because he's got to be connected somewhere, somehow. And they try to hide the money trail, but the money trail's always there for anybody who's willing to dig a little deep. So I'd have to look and see if there's a good money trail. But I think he definitely tries to revise history first by saying, that the United States was always, everything the United States did after World War II was about protecting other countries' security and such and such and such. No country has ever done that in history. No nation state, no regime has ever put other countries' security first. And he uses the term security without even really, defining it clearly. So that's a case of, him being ambiguous, so he can weasel out of it if necessary. But no, every country has always been about the interests, every power structure, every regime. I like the word regime as a descriptive of a political institution or a power institution. So every regime in history has always been about their interests first. To do anything else would be irrational. Okay? Now, they don't always make the right decisions in their interests. How regimes make mistakes is they're usually very short-sighted, or they get that God complex and they don't take their rivals seriously. There's a lot of reasons. But in their minds, what they're doing every day is for their particular interests. That's how they see it. And then secondly, he said, the catch was just that we wrote their security policy, which again, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but we did a lot more than write countries' security policies. We controlled their economies. We toppled their governments when we felt the need to. We've caused famines. We've assisted in genocides. We have continued colonization. All these kids now are being taught that colonization is bad, bad, bad. But at the same, then they're in the same bullshit indoctrination camps that they go to. They're told to, they're indoctrinated to worship the U.S. government, which continues to colonize to this day. When we look at colonialization, just on a brief side note here, when we look at colonialization, generally speaking, historically speaking, that has to do with exploiting the resources of another group of people. And we still do that. We still topple governments in Africa. We recently did one in Africa, Guyana, okay, because they had, I think it was Guyana, or is that South America? That's only, those are the only, I'm pretty good with geography. I always have been. I always loved maps, but when you start getting to Guyana, there's like a Guyana in Africa and a Guyana in, a French Guyana, I think, in South America. So I think in Guyana, we recently toppled the government. So, we're still doing colonialization. We toppled that government because they had aluminum, I believe. There was Ethiopia, where we recently had a proxy war there. We were funding the Tigris rebels. It wasn't even really kept a secret, It's just that, of course, the media, which is part of the power structure, never really reported on the United States' involvement on it. But these kids are taught, on the one hand, colonialization. I guess that's a big push in a lot of these schools. They talk a lot about colonialization, which is okay, it's good to talk about, but then at the same time they're indoctrinated into believing, the colonialization isn't happening anymore and our government's perfect. And these kids, just now I'm getting distracted, but I think I've said all I need to say about Peter Zeihan. But I'm telling you what, these kids are coming out of college and high school absolutely indoctrinated, but I think that within a few years they usually start seeing that they were taught a bunch of nonsense for the most part. So that's Peter Zeihan. Probably by the end of the year, he's going to have 1 million subscribers. Despite the fact that everything he was talking a lot about Ukraine. Everything he said that I saw about Ukraine was a bunch of BS. And no one, for someone who talks or who makes it a point to present himself as extremely intelligent, educated, etc., which, like I mentioned, is, a trick that people use a lot of times. Besides that, if he's not, for someone who is trying to present himself as being so intelligent, then he shouldn't be so stupid as to buy all of the bullshit propaganda and repeat it on his own channel and then make deductions based on that nonsense propaganda and embarrass himself time and time again, because he literally embarrassed himself. He did nothing but embarrass himself about Ukraine. He goes on Joe Rogan, he embarrasses himself some more, talking about Russia's demographic collapse. Russia did have a problem in the mid-2000s. In the early 2000s, late 90s, of course, because, they were having a lot of economic problems. So, birth rates went down. Obviously, that's what's going to happen, right? Fucking dropped my tank from my... he's going to continue to embarrass himself, to continue to be wrong, but he's being funded, he's being promoted, first of all, by YouTube, which tells you he's got some connections to the deep state. And who knows where his money's coming from. He came out of nowhere. No one knows anything about this guy. So, classic plant. classic classic subversion bullshit artist, I would know. I had family that were subversion people, right? So I would know. I swear I could see these people a mile away. But maybe I'm just giving myself too much credit and flattering myself. I don't know. But okay, I am out.